Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast with your hosts, Jason Science and Dr. Clint Mccoy.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 139. Tonight, I have joined with me on the line down in Illinois, Mr. Clint Mccoy. Clint, how's it going tonight, man?
Good, man. Glad to be with you again, Jason. We're glad to have the rain that we got over the last 24 hours. It's one of those $1 million.
It really has been. Although, you know, we've been lucky here in Wisconsin, at least in the part of the world that I live in. We've had some pretty timely rains where it kind of was stretched right thin. The corn was starting to wilt a little bit, and we got some rain. But what have you been up to, man?
Oh, working like a dog as usual. Every day on the clinic floor, man.
Yeah.
Won't be long, and we'll be back after. I'm hanging some cameras. You know, we hung some last week. Father's Day weekend's always a pretty good time to get out and throw some long soak cameras up. And I did a couple of those real familiar spots that we like to cover. That's about it. It won't be long. We'll be starting to see those velvet bucks. They're already starting to come along pretty good down here.
Yeah, you know, I don't think I sent you a video of Mr. Perfect, did I?
Oh yeah, absolutely did.
I did. Okay, I did send it to you. Okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's him. I mean, he's got the brow tines that Mr. Perfect would have, so that'll be a fun story to see if it'd be a great story if I end up getting him. But hey, let's
Zach find one of those sheds.
Zach, yeah, laying in the middle of a hayfield.
Yeah, you got good history with that dude.
I do. You know, I've never seen him myself, but everybody who I invite to come hunting with me sees him. You know, Dan Infault and I, actually Mario was there too. We were talking about that when we did a recent walkthrough of my property there, and Dan's like, well, you can let me come out here, right? And I'm like, absolutely not. And he's like, why not? I'm like, because you're going to kill him in like 2 hunts. Forget it. No way. You're not invited. But anyway, speaking of Dan Infault and the hunting beast, we have patiently waiting for us to get done chit-chatting, Mr. Joe Rentmeester on the other line. Joe, how's it going tonight?
Good. How you guys doing?
I'm doing good.
Good, Joe, man. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time. I know you've been kind of in high demand lately, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm almost celebrity status. Pretty cool.
Yeah, right, and for all the right reason.
That's good. I'm just kidding.
Oh man, so what's new and exciting this year for you? Any big plans of going anywhere this fall that you can talk about at least?
Well, hopefully the Public Land Challenge again. I've heard a few names thrown out there in regards to what states. So I mean, if I can get back to do that again, that would be pretty cool. I was in Ohio last year. That was exciting. So I'd really like to do that again. The gentleman that I met up with down there was sending me trail cam pictures of what survived, and it's exciting. So I want to do that. There's a pile of states I'd like to get to, but how many I get to, I don't know. We'll just kind of fly by the seat of our pants and see what happens, I guess.
How many states did you get to last year?
It was just Ohio and Michigan, and then my home state, Wisconsin.
Okay. And just for reference, for my sake, because I'm obviously in Wisconsin as well, you're in the southeastern part of the state, right?
Yeah, you could almost say east central part of the state. But yeah, that's correct.
East Central. So
sure.
Dan
Maybe
Infault,
I'm saying that wrong.
Part of the world.
But I'm above Dan Infault by an hour.
Above Dan Infault by an hour, like?
Yep, north.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
I have to get in your territory once in a while then. Cool. So it's probably safe to say you hunt a lot of marshes.
Yep. That's our That's what allows the deer to survive around where we live.
Okay.
It's thick and nasty and wet.
Yeah, I just listed a 529-acre marsh over on the other side of Rosendale, and I saw some of the bucks that have been shot out of there, and I'm not surprised because I know that over by Beaver Dam, there's always Dodge County always produces some big deer. I just often wonder how a guy or gal goes about bow hunting those deer.
I think, isn't the state record from over there somewhere in that area? I don't know specifically, but
I think something happened around Beaver Dam a few years ago. That thing was, and it might be the state bull buck.
Yeah.
I'm not. I think that's what it is. I don't remember who shot it, but someone close to the area that I grew up in killed that deer.
Yeah, a local guy by me did a full body mount on it. It was pretty cool.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was around the Beaver Dam area. I'm not 100% sure, but
sure.
In one of those cattail marshes. Well, let's jump right into it. One of the things that that intrigued me, just watching you and Dan on the Public Land Challenge last year with the hunting public was, I guess, number one, the distance that you traveled to get to, I'm going to call it ground that was likely to be familiar to you, not in terms of you being there before, but familiar in terms of its layout. Would that be accurate?
For me, it was a little bit different because it was kind of river bottoms and hill country, and I don't really deal with much in regards to river bottoms and hill country. We were up around the bottom of the lake, which it wasn't a cattail marsh. It was like a phragmite marsh, I guess you could call it. So that was a little bit different. So it was kind of a mixed bag up there.
Okay. Bottom line is you worked your ass off and you killed a deer. Yeah,
absolutely.
How tell us how you pulled that off. I remember watching the show and for you guys it looks like your style is to basically it looked to me like hunting islands. Is that accurate?
So the island hunting was in Minnesota the year before, where we were. It was early season. That was in September.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
We were hopping Oak Islands, and this was a little bit different. There were acorns were still plentiful, but we couldn't really find those Oak Island type setups.
Okay.
But you want me to kind of just break down from start to finish how the whole Michigan hunt went, basically?
Yeah, if you could, just unless Clint, you have any questions, I'd like to hear, I guess, first of all, how you go about identifying your spot from the air and what you do and don't look for, whether it's Michigan, Minnesota, or whatever state. What are some do's and don'ts on Joe Rentmeester's list, I guess?
Sure. So the first thing Dan and I were looking for, just on maps or talking with other people, was looking for swamps or marshes, as I said earlier, because when you get to high pressure areas, it seems like the last place that people go is into the swamps or the thick nasty. I don't know if it's because they're afraid, or I know that's part of it, or if it's just really hard work. But it seems to be the one place where you don't have hikers and dogs going. I guess dogs running around, stray dogs going, just all kinds of. The deer don't get the intrusion of the swamp, so that seems to be where they can get big. So that was our starting point. That's how we ended up in the swamp. There was that little swamp at the bottom of the lake up there. We really started by talking to a bunch of different people on the hunting beast that lived in Michigan, and they're saying, "Hey, check out this spot, check out that area." And the area that I ended up killing, it was a specific wildlife refuge, and one of our friends told us, "Check it out. I've got a friend. He goes in this particular area, kills 100-inch buck every year." And that's what kind of piqued our interest. We said, "Hey, if a resident can go on public land, kill a 100-inch buck in there, we can get in there and kill something too." So that's what kind of led us to the specific area. Now, in the specific area where we ended up killing, on the map, what really caught our attention was there was a point. Basically, what you had was it was like a ridge, and the ridge went back to a point, and on each side of the ridge was a river down below. but there was a huge rainstorm that went through at the time, and it flooded out the river bottom, so it pushed everything basically up into that ridge. And at basically one end of the ridge was real brushy. That's where the brushy and thick, and that's where the bedding ended up being. And then the other end of it was a soybean field. So to summarize, we started in the soybean field, and there, to our surprise in Michigan, we were actually surprised to see so many deer over the soybean field initially. The first night there was like a 2.5-year-old out there that we were gunning for. And we just kept working our way back in deeper to different spots until we got to where they're actually bedding. And we were right on top of bedding. After we set up, that buck came in, I think it was within 5 minutes after getting set up. Mind you, we got set up late because we had another hunter come through, so we decided to move further back, but we were right in the bedding is what it ended up being.
Okay. So why was it that you didn't see the bedding from the air, or didn't have a good inclination that that's where they were bedding? Is that why you basically hunted from the outside in?
Yeah, basically, yep, we were hunting from the outside in. When you've got the field is going to be, how do I explain it, the last place that they're going to be bedding, obviously. Yeah, so I guess to explain it the easiest, we're hunting from the outside in. There are a few little topographical features on the map that Dan pointed out. He said, usually when I look at properties, this is where I see them coming up out of. So we hit a few of those spots within the woods, but we just had to keep working back until we ran into them.
Okay. So that night that you ran into the other hunter, you said you saw a 2.5-year-old, was it, within 5 minutes of being set up?
Well, no. So the very first night that we hunted over the field, Jake and I from the hunting public,
okay,
we had a bunch of deer come out, and there was a 1.5-year-old buck and a 2.5-year-old buck.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, the second night we made a little adjustment to try, hopefully that 2.5-year-old buck would come out in the same spot and we'd shoot it right in the field. And then we hunted over the field a handful of times to basically put enough pressure on the field that the deer stopped making it out to the field before dark. So then we started working our way in at that point.
Okay. And
into the timber.
Was that a tactic, or was that just a circumstance that led you back into the timber?
I would say it was just a situational circumstance that led us back in there.
Okay.
And I will say that's one mistake that as a young hunter I've made so many times. Growing up, I watched all of Dan and Paul's marsh bucks videos, and I would always dive right to the back, dive right in the swamp, and a lot of times I've been learning as I get older, you can just play it back, start in the field when you're hunting a new area. Just you don't always have to dive in right tight up to the bedding. Sometimes they're making it out to the crop field. So,
Joe, how deep did you wind up getting?
If you watch the video, I'll say one number. If trying to remember back right now, I'll say 700 yards. If you watch the video again, you'll have the exact number, but my memory is failing me there. But 700 yards off the field, I would say.
Really? And did you feel like you were in a bachelor group of bucks when you actually killed this one, or were they at the point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we kind of did, because so Tim, our media guy on the hunting beat, he was hunting out there as well. And the night before, he said a real low and wide buck with another 2 or 3 bucks. So when I saw this specific buck, it clicked in my head right away. I thought this is potentially the buck that's with the other one. When I did shoot him, there was I think it was like a 1.5-year-old buck that was with him as well. So I think we're kind of into a bachelor group. Yeah. How many were in that group and where they're moving on that specific day, it's hard to say, but it did seem that way. Yeah.
I guess one of the questions that I always have when I'm talking with Dan, or when we're talking about hunting, we'll call it beast style, which seems what a lot of folks call it, is how close is too close and how close is not close enough?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I get that's very situational, right? So like if you've got a spot at home that you've hunted for years and years, and you know where the bedding is, you know where that exact sweet spot is. In our situation, we were going to territory we weren't familiar with, so we're, I guess, playing it a little bit more gentle, you could say. But then you hear other guys talk, and they'll dive right into what looks good right away because they just have a short window. We did have a longer window. I think we were there a total of like 7 or 8 days, and we killed on the 6th or 7th day, somewhere along that line. But yeah, I guess, and that's another thing to point out too. Like Andy May, for example, he'll get 2 or 3 days to hunt an area, and then he just dives in immediately to what looks good. So he can't play back.
Okay. So if you had your choice, how would you do it?
Out of state in a new area or at home?
Well, I think I know the answer for at home.
Yeah.
If you're a public land hunter and you're jumping from spot to spot, are you gonna play it safe if you've got a lot of land at your disposal, which a lot of public hunters do, or are you gonna lay back and wait? And again, all of this is thrown out the window come the rut to an extent. So we're primarily talking early season, right?
Yep. Yeah. And see, that's a tough question to answer because I think that's still so situational. Like if you compare this particular situation where you had the deer hitting the field, then in this situation you'd want to stay in the field and perhaps work your way in. Now, if you compare that to like the Minnesota hunt the year before, if we would have stayed back near the crop field area, I guess the crop field areas were burned out, it seemed, the first weekend, and everything was way back, so we had to play up, tight, and close. So it's very situational depending upon what food source you're hunting, what the pressure looks like, all different sorts of things. And by the end of the week, too, in Michigan, there was a ton of cars in that same parking lot that we were using. The first day we got there, I don't think there's maybe one car or something like that. So pressure wrenched up really fast. And that's another thing to point out, too. The moment you have other guys in there, it really is a competition, and you have to be able to stay ahead of the other guys. So that in those situations, you have to get aggressive, I would say.
Gotcha.
Joe, let me flip the line of questioning now. Say you've got, so you're like we're at now, dead square in the start of the summer, and you're wanting to put boots on the ground into a brand spanking new marsh area that you've never hunted before. Walk me through what that prep looks like come season.
Sure. So yeah, if it's brand spanking new right now, what I would do at this point in the game, there's so many different things going on, so many food sources changing. Deer aren't exactly doing yet what they're going to be doing when the season starts. In some situations, it can be very, very close to what they're going to be doing. They can be in that particular area. But I guess what I would start by doing at this time of the year is sit back and try and glass. If you've got a crop field outside of that marsh, sit back, glass the crop field, see what's coming out of there. If you can shine in your state, I would be shining at night. Around by us, you can obviously shine. And it's interesting, too, what you see an hour after dark versus at 1 in the morning. It seems some of those big boys, they'll stay out of the crop fields until they don't even hear cars on the road, basically, is what it seems. So I would stay back in the distance, and then once I have an idea of what's coming out, where it's coming out, if you do have a buck coming out to the edge of the field, out of the swamp, I would hunt the field edge as long as the wind is right and the thermals aren't sucking down into the swamp. If it's not coming out, then I guess that's where I would probably get aggressive and dive right in. I wouldn't necessarily want to mess with trail cameras too much, but in some situations, I guess I would put trail cameras out to get an idea of what the deer are doing in that area. Like if I'm really, really struggling figuring out what's going on and I don't have a good estimate of what's happening, that's where I would put the trail cameras out and maybe blow it for the season, and it would be great the next. That's another thing, I guess.
Joe, this is all good advice. I've got to, be the first to tell you, I'm never hunted in a marshland area. I'm from southeastern Illinois, where we have broken farm country and small blocks of timber, and there actually is about 10 minutes north of here. There's a fairly large marsh that's public that comes off of a riverbed, and so I'm so out of my element when it comes to thinking on those lines of marsh country versus and what you guys teach with the beast versus what I'm so used to in broken farm country. Can you walk us through some of the differences?
So I guess in your marsh, I guess, is that like a cattail marsh or like a tamarack cedar marsh, or what does it?
It's gonna be probably cattails.
So it's just flat cattails with not a lot of trees.
Yeah.
Okay. So like in a situation like that, in a way it almost gets easier than like a cedar swamp or a tamarack swamp, because you have so few of high spots in that swamp where the deer can bed that you can kind of narrow down. Like if you do have a deer coming out of that swamp, a buck coming out of that swamp that you're watching, there's not as many places that you would have to hit before you run into him. If that makes sense. Was that your question?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yep. Versus like if you're in farm country and you've got a number of little woodlots, it can get a little bit trickier because there's so many different places that he could be. You know.
So start by finding the high ground.
Yep, the high ground where they can be. And it might be sometimes like in the cattails, it's just a little high spot. There's no trees around, but it's just high enough to keep them out of the wet. Sometimes you'll just have that one lone tree out there with some ground at the base of it. It can be a number of different little things like that.
And does there? I'm sure it does, but say you're in late season now, will they still use that same type of area even if there's ice on it?
Yeah, so the ice is weird. That's something I've really been paying attention to the last few years. When it gets really slick, they seem to be somewhere else. They don't. I mean, I'm sure there's still some. I know there's still some in there, but when it's like I've ran wireless trail cameras on the trails in the swamps, and the moment you have that sheer ice in there, the trail cameras just go cold. But the moment you get a little bit of snow on that ice where they can grip, the cameras heat back up again pretty quick.
How?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I would never even thought of that. Like,
yeah, and I've even in some spots too. I've seen some really nasty spots there. It seems like there's not as many deer. You'll have more so the matured deer on the wireless trail cameras when everything is thawed. It's almost like the does and fawns don't even need to waste their time going into the thick. And then when the ice and snow does get on, then suddenly all the does and fawns and younger bucks will move their way back into the swamps. What it seems like, what I've noticed personally.
So
it's like it becomes easier walking, and then it's good enough for them, right?
Would it be fair to say, Joe, then that it's your opinion that mature deer in I'm just going to switch it up for a second and say we're in broken farm country. Before you got on the line, I was telling Clint about a new piece that I'm going to be hunting this year that is broken farm country. And it's this particular property that I'll be hunting has got 3 lakes on it. And I use the word lake loosely. I'm going to say there's somewhere between, 15 and 4 acres. There's 3 different lakes, and in between these lakes, there's some cattails, some a little bit of high ground, but primarily a lot of water in amongst the weeds right now, or the growth. And I'm going to assume that that'll change over the course of the summer. But how do those things relate to? Because it sounded like you felt like the mature deer are going to find a way to bed out there. Whereas the does and fawns aren't. And this area that I'm going to be hunting has just got an extremely high deer density and actually an extremely high, an extremely well balanced age class in terms of bucks. Would you still say that they're going to try and bed in that marsh at all costs, if possible, even if they are walking in ankle to knee deep water to get there?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with pressure and, like you said, deer density as well. And I shouldn't say I've seen swamps where the does and younger bucks have no problem going into it, but I've also seen other swamps. So I shouldn't say it's always one certain way. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question, I think in your situation, obviously, without seeing it, I think it would have a lot to do with pressure. I think if that pressure gets really intense and the deer aren't smelling human intrusion in the swamps, then that's where they're going to be. If all the human intrusion is in the farmland, I think that's very possible. Obviously, depending on what it looks like and it's got enough bedding.
Sure.
Okay. That's kind of a tricky one. You have to look at it, I guess.
Well, we may have to do that. There's going to be very, very little pressure on this piece, and in the area as a whole, there's going to be pressure, but not anything close to what you encounter. Just on the, say, 600 acres that we've got to hunt. It's going to be dependent upon how busy real estate is, I guess, how much pressure I get to put on it, if any, because I've also got my lease down in the southwestern part of the state for at least another 3 years or more. But it's two very different pieces of land, and I was kind of excited to talk to you because I wanted to, if you don't have any more questions, at least for the time being, I wanted to just switch gears a little bit and talk about, you mentioned thermals, Joe. And after spending the day with Dan out at my lease, it became very apparent to me that he had yet again drilled into my head that you have to look at land features, particularly in the southwest part of the state, or what you maybe hunted in Minnesota, as scent as like water running downhill, and you got to look at the terrain and know that by and large, more often than not, your scent is going to get pulled downhill in the evening and uphill in the morning. And I wonder, how does that change in broken farm country like Clint hunts, or in marsh country like you're hunting? I know that when you're in that broken farm country and water isn't present, that's going to affect it. Could you go through all those different scenarios in terms of how you see the wind affecting it?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not a pro in the world of thermals, especially in hill country. What I've seen in the farm country is not even too bad either, unless you have, say, like a water hole just inside of the timber. You'll see it at last light. You'll see the wind kind of sucking towards it. But the main thing I see with the thermals in the type of terrain that I hunt is, say you're hunting the edge of a field. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, and say you've got the wind blowing out into the field, so it's not a problem. At last light, when everything gets dead calm, suddenly those thermals will suck your scent right back into the swamp. And a lot of times, the deer are coming out specifically in a spot where it will suck back into the swamp. Like I've quite a bit, I see it like you get like a valley, for example, that kind of goes down into the swamp. The deer seem to come out down in those valleys where they can get the scent of the field, it seems. Mm-hmm. That's the big one. But I'm by no means am I a thermal expert. That one I've got a lot of learning to do on yet.
Well, you're obviously doing something right, because you've had some pretty good recent success, I'd say.
Yeah, and for a guy like me that doesn't know what they're doing in the hill country, when you are there, just keep throwing those milkweed seeds, and if you see the wind doing something that doesn't appear to be favorable, get down right away and adjust over. And that's how I've been successful in hill country, is just by working hard and adjusting quickly.
Clint, is there anything that you notice that's funky about the wind where you're at? Because it's flat.
Maybe not so much. Yeah, it's pretty flat. There's real gentle roll to it. Back on the same like thermal scenario, one of the things that I see in our neck of the woods, since it does real gently roll, that if you're like in the timber in broken farm country, man, these deer like to travel those low spots right around those creek beds that seem, like Joe was saying, come last light and everything calms down. Your thermals are always wanting to suck down in there, and you'd be surprised at how many deer you'll see travel in those low creek basins, like where we're at. There's a lot of hardwood ridges. Everybody wants to sit up on top of the ridge all the time, and we're not talking huge mountain ridges. We're talking more like small knolls, but around here we call them ridges. That's all we've got. But everybody wants to be up on top because they can see everything, and you'd be surprised at how often you find deer down on that, right around that thermal pole. It seems like all the time.
Now, does there get to be in that thermal pole in those situations? Is it just a mess of swirling wind when you get down there?
It sure can be. Yeah, it depends on, of course, proximity to the edge. But yeah, those areas are difficult to hunt in those conclusions because you get tons of swirly. a lot of it.
Sure.
Yeah. I think sometimes it has to do with, and I don't know because I'm not a thermal guru either, but I feel like when there's water in it, my thermal pull to it is different than when it's dry, or semi-dry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it has a lot to do with the heating and cooling of that water.
Yeah,
but definitely.
And I've seen you guys talk about that on swamp bedding type stuff, and where you're hunting around a lot of water. But I even think it can happen in small little creek basins like that.
Yeah, I would definitely think so. I would say in the swamps for us, like when you get in a swamp where everything's fairly consistent, usually the prevailing wind is pretty reasonable, unless you have some like a cluster of cedars that the wind's working around or something like that. But once you get in the water, you're good.
Could you, when you talk about a swamp, what?
Yep.
I mean, for me, a swamp could be 20 acres of marshy area. For you, is that not a swamp? Is that just again broken farm country? Or are we talking about the same
mud
thing?
hole?
Yeah, a mud hole.
I guess I would say anything that's wet, anything that's muddy, anything with cattails, cedars, tamaracks. I think the appropriate term, if you say marsh, I think that's more of your cattail scenario. If you say swamp, I think you're more so talking like a cedar, tamarack type thing. I could be completely wrong on that. I mean, if I go with the dictionary kind of thing, but yeah, that's I guess what I'm referring to. Anything wet.
Gotcha.
Because I've got some areas where it's hundreds and hundreds of acres of swamp, and then I've got the next area where you get 2 acres of a wet little hole down at the bottom of a woods. It's real thick, and you can just get right on the edge of there and have the deer come out at last light. A handful of deer will come out every night, so it really depends.
Gotcha. Okay. How do you? So it seems like what I thought I understood you to say is that in that scenario where we're talking about being in a swamp, the wind is more often than not going to dictate where you hunt. You're not going to put as much stock in thermals as you would in hill country because you just
Correct.
Okay. So
yeah, you can just usually look at the prevailing wind, and that's your starting point. Obviously, when you get to a spot, sometimes it's different than that. But
so when that wind lays down at night, what happens?
In a lot of those situations, that's where it starts to suck back into the swamp. So let's say I'm hunting a field edge. What I'll do a lot of times is if I know at what angle they're coming through the swamp, I'll get back off the trail, say maybe 30 yards.
Mm-hmm.
That way my wind is still sucking into the swamp, but it's not sucking into the swamp in the direction that they're coming from. Mm-hmm. So my wind is almost parallel with the path that they're traveling, sort of. Not quite parallel, but almost.
Gotcha.
I shouldn't say my wind, my thermal. My wind in a perfect situation is going the other way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. Clint, you?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Joe, let me ask you something off of wind topic real quick. How often would you say during the course of the hunting calendar year do you use water entry to get in and out of your spots? Like, do you ever use a kayaking, boating in, anything like that?
That sort of thing. I've got a handful of spots like that. It's not all the time, but I do a handful. I guess I would almost say like 5% of the time. There's a few spots like that.
And so, cause again, from around here, like we don't have those opportunities, and I've got just a couple of spots where I think I might, little isolated spots where it might be to my advantage to actually try that. And I've never done it before. Like, walk me through when you decide, yeah, I'm gonna try this. Here we go.
Yeah. So in those types of like a kayak scenario, it seems to be, I'm thinking in my head of all my specific situations where I've used the kayak. It almost always seems to be morning where I'm sneaking in on the backside of bedding. I don't have a ton of night spots. I know there's a lot of situations where it would make sense with a night spot, but a lot of times in the morning, I know where the bedding is, and it works really slick because usually in the morning you have to say walk across the field and then into the hardwoods and then you pull all the deer in back into the swamp. Whereas with the kayak, you can really get in there. I've got one spot where it's like a bowl, and a lot of people hunt. It's public land. A lot of people will hunt this bowl at night, and I think it's impossible to kill a deer in there at night because your wind is sucking right down into that bowl because in the middle of the bowl there's water. So it's just a little spot too, and the deer seem to get big in there, and I think that's why. And the only way I see to make it work is in the mornings you can slip up in there with a kayak, and your wind is usually fine. In my experience, it's been fine in there, and then you catch them coming back to bed. So I guess that for me, it's morning hunt. I know it could be other ways, but
that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's cool.
I mean, a lot of work, probably, but a lot of work, but probably a lot of fun too. Like when you're going in on something like that, and say you're, trying to catch them, intercept them coming back to bed. So you get set up in there, and you're really, you were sound with your setup. You didn't bump them out. Are you going to sit there all day, depending on time of year? You going to back out?
Where I hunt, not at all. I usually sit there till it gets light, and then get down. And I don't want to stay. I sit there for 15. In some situations, I sit there for 15 minutes after light, and then get down because any decent buck is going to be back by that time. And in some situations, I'll sit for an hour. In a lot of those situations, in the dark, you'll hear them come. I get out there really early, so in the dark, you'll hear them come in. They're below you, and then you have to sit and wait because at some point after it gets light, a lot of times they'll stand up and browse around, or they'll just slightly. I don't know if the thermals are changing and they just move over a little bit. But sometimes you'll sit an hour just to see what you heard get in below you and to see what moves around, sort of thing.
Interesting.
I've actually, there was one, I think we're going to put it up as a YouTube video on the beast. And I had one where I snuck in with the kayak, got set up in the tree, and the buck came in. I think it was like a half hour after light, and I saw him bed down out in front of me. And then that night, I looped all the way around completely, came in from dry land. I knew exactly where he was bedded. I took a bunch of pictures with my phone to make sure I picked. That morning, I picked the tree I was going to be sitting in that night because I knew where he was. And then that night, I snuck up to the tree, climbed up the tree, and at last light, I shot him. That buck I didn't end up getting, but it's kind of a neat video. And that's an example too. Sometimes your morning sit's almost like a scouting mission. You see where he beds down, and maybe you can adjust for the night.
And when we're talking about these situations, we're primarily talking September through October 15th ish.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, but it would be completely different once the rut hits, and then obviously you've got ice in the late season. But absolutely.
We've seen what you're capable of when it's super cold out.
Yep.
Oh man, was it 2 years ago that you were hunting? Was it a bean field? I can't remember what you were hunting, but I just remember it was like 40-mile-an-hour winds, and you were headed out. I don't remember if you got anything or not, but
yeah, that was the Castle Swamp down by Dan. That's
right.
Coolest thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got close, didn't you?
Yeah, very close to shooting my biggest deer ever. Yeah, that was neat.
Awesome. Well, I mean, certainly our conversation has led us to the rut, so that begs the question: how do things change for you when it comes rut if you haven't filled your tag already?
Yeah, the rut's a really tricky one that I'm starting to get better at because I shouldn't say always, but a lot of times I'm trying to hunt a specific deer, and then the rut kind of throws a wrench into that, so you don't know where he is or what he's doing.
Kind of.
Another thing I'm starting to find is some of these older, bigger deer, once they get past that 5 years old plus, the reason around where I live, the reason they seem to get that way is because they aren't travelers, they aren't big nomads, and during the rut, they seem to kind of stick in their little areas. They seem to just go after the does that won't get them killed. So they're hanging around the doe bedding areas in the thick. So you can kind of still target them that way and manipulate them that way. I guess I'm not the greatest rut hunter in the world. That's where I'm starting to travel. It's not something I've always done, but I'm traveling more during the rut to kind of catch that buck cruising on a ridge or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So you're not. It doesn't sound like you're changing a whole lot of tactic type stuff.
No. There was a 5-year-old that I shot 3 years ago. It's my biggest deer, and he was pretty much, when I killed him, he was pretty much doing what he always did, but the rut brought him out really early, and that was his downfall. So I'm not changing a ton, but unless if I'm going out of state, then I'm kind of following those traditional rut hunting methods that we all follow, looking for the funnels, looking for the where different terrain features come together, stuff like that.
Sure. What's your favorite?
Time of the year?
Yeah, let's go with time of the year, and where would you like to be sitting at that time of year?
Boy, I think early season is my favorite. Really close with late season after some of my experiences, just because in late season those deer are so vulnerable. If you're onto something, you've got a decent chance of getting a crack at it. But I would say early season just because the deer haven't been messed with yet. Because they haven't been messed with a whole lot yet, and they're on decent patterns that you can dial in on and make a kill.
Joe, I think that we all, as more experience that we gain under our belts, all of us develop that one can't miss day for whitetail season. I know what my day is, and mine's for where we're at. November 7th seems to be the day where they're not in full swing, but they're right on that teeter-totter edge. Is your one not miss day early in the season then?
Yeah, I would probably say, if I could only hunt one day a year, I think it would be opening day.
Really?
Would be it for me, yeah. And you just have so much more control. I like my control, I guess.
So if it is opening day, it's safe to assume you're not going in blind. You probably scouted this area relatively extensively. You probably know it and have hunted it before. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if I were going to a new area, then I would say it's sometime during the rut.
Okay.
And I know there's a lot of fancy terminology out there for you got the lockdown, all that different stuff. I don't really pay attention to a whole lot of that. I couldn't tell you what the best days are. That's where I'm usually texting buddies that I respect and saying, hey, when's the best time to take my vacation if I'm going to be hunting this sort of terrain, That's, I guess, not a strength of mine.
Gotcha. Because you're tagged out by then, typically.
Hopefully, yeah.
He killed him on opening day.
Right,
yeah.
Right on. How many times have you killed on opening day? Actually, let me ask you this: how many times have you killed on a first time in hunt?
Oh, that's almost every time. Almost every time. In regards to the opening day question, I've flung more arrows than I've killed on opening day, and usually opening weekend. While hunting, I usually see the buck I'm after. It seems to be what it is. See him or kill him, one of the two.
That's pretty good.
You know how many times I've killed on opening day? Nunzio. Not a one.
The closest.
It's always 90 degrees. It's always 90 degrees down here. It's the pit.
Oh yeah, that's tough. I don't blame you for that. 90 degrees is ridiculous.
Not saying we ain't trying, but I'm for about 20, I think.
We deal with it up here too. I mean, what was it this last year? Like 900. Actually, no. This last year it was pretty good. 2 years ago it was just ridiculously hot. I was just going through that video actually last night, getting it ready to send out to our editor, and I it was so flippin' hot that night. I I sat the whole night and had beads of sweat running down my face on every interview that I did.
That's what makes it so amazing for me. So when is your traditional opening day? You guys go the 15th, don't you?
Yeah,
right about.
It's like between the 13th and 15th. Yeah.
That just blows my mind that you're like, yeah, opening day, I can't miss. Like, that's, if I had one day to hunt, it would be it. Like, I would fail abysmally if my opening day was the only day I could hunt. Man, that is amazing to me.
Yeah. Well, I would say all the killers around, my buddies around here that are killers, usually get it done in the first week as well. And it's kind of when you have to, because once the pressure starts ramping up, they're either in the refuges or they're on the private land and they're gone with the pressure. So it's kind of make or break.
And you attribute a lot of that to, for lack of, I'm sure there's some cool phrase that they use, but you're essentially patterning them to an extent. Yeah. You've likely watched them most of the summer. You've identified them at some point in August, and from there you're backtracking what they're doing and applying. I mean, you can't be an idiot and get this done, but you're applying the knowledge that you have to the situation and the terrain and all that stuff, and just you're getting the job done.
Exactly. Yep.
And I know that
it doesn't. It may sound like an excuse, but like on my end, we going 2 weeks further beyond that 15th of September start date. I feel like they're kind of shifting. We always see or hear tell of that seasonal summer to fall shift in some of these bucks around here, and by a lot of the bucks that I've got a lot of summer intel and history with, they start doing their shift, vanishing, moving different farms, showing up on other trail cameras, right around like the very end of September to the very first day of October. And then it's like you ask yourself, why haven't I killed on opening day? A lot of times I'm wasting my time on summer intel on deer that have shifted. And that's telling on yourself, but I'm sure that's what happens. And it's not that we don't see some of our target bucks on opening day, and then a few times, but man, by and large, we get those guys shift by October 1st, and then we're hunting different deer.
Yeah, they definitely do that here as well. I've shot a number of bucks where somebody will show me a trail cam picture that they had of it at a different time of the year, the same year, quite a bit of ways away. So they definitely do shift. I would say that's an advantage for us, where we can watch them all summer and then go try and shoot them on their summer patterns. Absolutely. And they're just a calmer animal, it seems, at that time of the year, September. A little calmer, a little less edgy.
Do you think, Joe, part of that calmness is attributed to the fact that they likely haven't felt a whole lot of pressure? Because I guess I'll let you answer that, and then I'll go to the rest of what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's that, and there's a lot of studies out there. I'm no professional in this stuff, but there's a lot of studies out there that have to do with their testosterone ramping up and then becoming edgy with that. I've heard of so many different theories on why it is, but I do think it has a fair amount to do with that testosterone kind of changing them as an animal. Because sure. I mean, you can watch them out in the field all summer long. They'll come out maybe an hour before dark. Sometimes they don't. But you can watch them do crazy stuff all summer long that they won't when the season starts. And I think it has a lot to do with just the change in their own bodies.
Joe, let me ask you a quick question, and it might get long-winded, but I swear there's a question in here somewhere. But
sure.
You primarily hunt public land. You don't hunt any private, correct?
Oh, no, I hunt plenty of private.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, it's become like, I don't know, 50-50. Yeah, a little less private than that nowadays.
Okay. If you had a piece of private and you were only going to hunt that private, do you think it's important for you to not be in there, not running trail cameras, not be disturbing them if at all possible, scouting from afar by just simply finding out where they're feeding, and if you know the land, make sort of a game plan from there, because it seems to me like the times that I've hunted public, and it's been a few years now, but I doubt that it's changed a whole lot. There doesn't seem to be a lot of traffic in, at least in Wisconsin here. There is not a lot of traffic. Even on opening day, there just wasn't a ton of traffic, and there wasn't a ton of people disturbing those deer prior to the season. Do you think that's what keeps a lot of folks from having success on private ground early? Is the amount of pressure and disturb the basically the disturbance that they're causing?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've seen with the trail cameras and everything. We've all seen that where you put up a trail camera, you get right away the first night or two, you get a picture of the deer that you're after, and he smells that camera there. He smells something just wrong and starts dodging it. I think any bit of pressure, any bit of scent, you're messing with them for sure.
So, and Clint probably knows where I'm going with this, but so if you felt like you already knew, the deer's there, what he's done in the past, then if that's the deer that you're after, then really what's the point in putting up trail cameras, etc., assuming that you can find that deer with your eyes?
Right.
Is that the key? Is being able to put eyes on him prior to the season starting and getting an idea of where he's feeding? Because if you can get an idea of where he's feeding and what the terrain is like, would you agree that you're probably going to be able to put a plan together?
Yeah, if you know from past years. And one thing I've tried since I was a little kid, when I was old enough to hunt or run trail cameras, I have tried to get a pattern of a deer on a trail camera, night after night after night, and then go kill it. And with cameras, I've never done it. I've never had it work out, and it just seems they figure out those cameras, your human scent to them. So once I know a deer is in the area that I want to go after, in the past I would have do kind of trail cameras in there, figure out what that deer was doing. But now I'm having more success pulling the trail cameras out of there and reading the sign or watching what they're doing from afar, that sort of thing.
Clint, do you agree with that?
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. Like that is spot on. We see it all the time, where, I run a bunch of cameras, and I used to, when I was only running a couple, I was the same way, Joe. I thought, man, I'll run this camera here and then I'll catch him over there with it next week and we'll get a quote pattern on him. And the more cameras that I run, the less I subscribe to quote patterning it here. I just don't think it can be done. Their movements are too haphazard and by chance sometimes, just by free will. I just don't think that happens. And on your point about, camera and pressure, if you can physically lay eyes on him that he's still alive, midsummer, the big question is, do you really need more intel than that? And I'm like you, I might put a camera or two on an edge, but if I've got some data on him, do I really need more?
Right. Or if you need more, how can you get that more data without impacting what that hunt's going to be when you finally do move in on him?
Yeah.
I think the only way you can do that is, like I said, by putting eyes on them.
Yeah.
We've got a buck.
Then you've got tracks and reading sign as well. If you've got an area that just has one big mature buck in it, and you check all the trails. I had one buck that I ended up killing in one morning. And that buck was cutting into the swamp. We got a fresh snow. And I ran up and down the whole swamp edge looking where those tracks cut in. And then I set up the next morning and he came back through the same spot his tracks were the previous day and killed him that way. So, you can track as well, obviously.
Interesting. I guess that's a whole tactic that I hadn't given a lot of thought to, because I'm on a significant amount of acreage with 52 trail cameras and
52.
52. Yep. Well, I shouldn't. I mean, not all of them go on my lease, but my lease is over 1,000 acres.
Right.
So it's pretty big. So those are still. I mean, it takes me 2 days to check them all if I'm going to check them all. But a lot of them last year I put on the 17th of July, and heck, Clint, did we find a couple the day that we were out shed hunting this spring?
Yeah.
I'm like, I forgot where they were. And they had great information
maybe.
on, and I'm now I've got like the best of both worlds. I've got this piece of property down the road that I have to teach myself not to go to very often, maybe ride by or whatever, and then I've got a piece of property 2 hours away and I do have a place over there that I stay at. I've got an apartment over there, but I'm just wondering, like, do I completely, we'll have a new partner in the trail camera world here shortly, and it'll be in the cellular end of it again. And do I just go with a couple of those and let that be enough, just to get an idea of what's where? Or I guess I'm sort of starting to rethink, maybe my tactics, because based on what you're telling me, and based on what Dan would teach, and I suspect what you would teach, is that the easiest, I hate to use the word easy because there's nothing easy about it, but the most effective way to kill that deer is to basically get them in the first week.
Yeah, and I guess it really depends too. Is it a deer that you're only seeing in the late season, or you're only seeing during the rut? If it's a homebody deer, I would say, yeah, the best time is that first week.
Okay.
Jason, I think you can look at, you already know he's there, right?
I do.
And he's, definitely survived through shed drop. So I think if I'm targeting a buck like him, instead of using cameras like we talked about to get some kind of linear equivocal pattern, I'm really I might crowd a deer like him and try. What I want to find out through those cameras isn't really his pattern. I just want to know what he calls home and where. And if I can just even get remotely close to where where he's heading, then the risk was worth it on those cameras. But as far as like inventory cameras, do you need a bunch of cameras on field edges and, stuff like that? Maybe not.
Do you know what? Can you tell me more about this deer? Have you hunted it for a number of years? Do you know what the bedding area looks like? Is this the spot that Dan and Mario walked with you?
Yeah.
Okay. What can you? I don't know if you guys videoed that or what, but can you tell us kind of the conclusion he came to? I'm very curious.
The conclusions that Dan and Mario came to with respect to this one particular deer?
Yeah.
I don't really think that we came to one. I didn't talk about talk about it a whole lot, other than he's so. I spoke earlier about going through a bunch of video to send to our editor. Turns out, I'm pretty sure, Clint, after watching the video from me pick up my first shed out there ever, that I picked up his shed 2 years ago. In the same general area that he lives. I believe that this deer is bedded out on a ridge, probably a mile from where it seems like he was feeding for the majority of the summer.
Okay. And then are you going to have to combat acorns early season back in the timber like that?
Yep.
Yeah, so then that gets tricky too, because he might just be hitting first available acorns, or if he's got acorns right in his bedding area or whatever, then it's in that situation. Then it'd be very tough to kill him early.
Clint picked up a shed.
Yeah, it'd be impossible. It sounds like he's a shifter, Jason. If he's going, a mile, he sounds like he shifts big time in the summers.
Well, no,
How far were
you picked up
from where? So where I found those sheds was close to where he summers.
Where you found that shed was on that ridge top where we all marveled at how high in the air Josh was. In that one with the stand, Joe. Just to give you a little bit of context here, we shed hunted mine, and Clint and the guys were marveling at how high up in the air the 2x4s were pounded into the tree. They had to have been all of 25 feet, but anyway, I think he's bedded back there, and he's traveling. Maybe it's not a mile, maybe it's 3/4 of a mile, but for him to get to any food other than acorns, he's going to have to travel that far. Now, because the composition of my timber has changed in the last 2 years, I really don't know what he's going to do. Because there's going to be, if there was, 10 acres of bedding cover 2 years ago, there's going to be 50 acres of bedding cover this year because it's been logged.
Oh, yeah.
So
Sure.
it's just kind of a who knows. But I think that and I've thought about this a lot lately. I think that there's a lot of value in a lack of pressure. I think that's why public hunting gets. You guys typically are successful or can be successful in that first week because you don't have people out tromping all over it all the time, in the preseason. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
Yeah, I think one difficult thing that you deal with is if you have high deer numbers, is you're always dealing with trying to get all those does and all those. Say you're sitting at the edge of a field or you're sitting a trail where it goes out to the crop field. You are always dealing with trying to get those other deer to get past you and not bust you, not blow back into the timber and freak everything out. I think that can be even more difficult. Versus sometimes you're hunting just one buck on public land. He's the only deer held up in this little hole, and you don't have to let other deer get by you. You just have to focus on one deer. You've got one set of eyeballs, which is like in your situation, if you've got all those, there's just all the more difficult sometimes, I think.
Yeah, well, and you're right. Sometimes I've again, since I have this luxury of having, a couple different places to go, and within those places, there's a lot of different places to hunt that I could, burn, a spot here or there. I think, maybe I'd just be better off because it is hill country, just not even messing with trail cameras early, which would suck because I have 52 of them. But it would save money on gas and batteries and all that stuff. I mean, I guess I already know that he's there, and I already know what he's done in years past. I don't think that's apt to change a whole bunch. I think the great unknown for me with this particular deer, which we call Mr. Perfect, we just might as well say the name. The challenge with this deer is I've never seen him on his feet in the summer with my own eyes.
Okay.
Now,
yeah,
and that's because I don't live there, so I'm not there often enough. Like Clint, you're out pretty much every night, aren't you? And come a month from now,
I know. Come from about a week from now, it's time to roll. Yeah. And it's more it's flatter and more open here, so I've got the ability to do some long distance spy jobs without tearing it up too bad. But like in your case where it rolls so steep and hard, I think especially, you made a good point, Jason, that they log that up there, and it's going to be a complete change as far as cover and available browse that's there. And so that's going to be a tricky one to troubleshoot. You now got to try and figure out where he's bedding, but now, like with the logging timber, he might change, he may stay the same, but he's definitely got a lot more options.
Yeah, he does, and the trails that were there that last year aren't there this year, but I think by and large they're going to be. I think he's going to probably do the same thing. I mean, I can tell. I guess I feel this is the way I feel about it right now, Joe, and you can tell me if you think my logic is wrong. I think I'd do more harm by going in there and trying to get a bunch of intel, deep in the timber or wherever by checking trail cameras, setting them on the 17th of July, which is about my date that I set them out, and then going in there on September 1st and checking them. I think I do more harm than good by doing that than I would by just sitting back, trying to glass from the road, trying to find out where he's at, and feeding. And if I know where he's feeding, I have a pretty good idea that I know about where he's bedding.
Yeah, I was just going to play the devil's advocate on that, because then, I mean, if you're sitting back, you're not running cameras in there and you don't know enough, then you're better off having cameras in there and knowing something and potentially having a little bit of pressure on them. You know, every year is different. Some of the deer I chase, you bump into them one time and they get real edgy. The next year you can bump into them once, and that was just kind of a fluke, and they go back to doing what they were doing. So I think there's a give and take there, and especially, you know, you're talking about your situation where it's logged out and everything's going to change. Everything's going to keep changing. Every year it's going to be a little different until all that stuff grows back up in this certain situation. I mean, I'd maybe even leave the cameras in there and just don't check them. And then once you really start hunting it and you're walking past cameras in those situations, then check them. But in a certain scenario there's a point where you're better off having the intel, maybe not getting them this year, trying to get them this year, but maybe not getting them this year, and then having that intel for next year. And then next year, leave the cameras out of there and diving after them. I mean, nobody wants to kill their target plus next year, but it's always something I guess to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well,
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you're gathering.
I've only had 2 years
gathering data points. Yeah.
Right, and
yeah, I might go camera light or camera medium and soak them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this deer is not camera shy.
How does he react to cameras?
Well, like for instance, I was explaining to Dan, and when the video comes out, everybody will be able to watch it. And I was explaining to Dan that I originally got this deer, on the edge of a field where typically I would never have expected to get him. I just threw a camera there because I had so doggone many. I just thought, well, why not? And lo and behold, I got a picture of what I thought when I originally saw the picture was a booner. Turns out he's probably 140. I was only 60 or 40 points off or whatever, but it was exciting nevertheless. And so what I tried to do from that point on, once I got him consistently there, is I just started to, I could backtrack him only so far, and then I'd lost him. And then randomly I would get him here and there, and Clint, and that's why I believe he's on that ridge of Josh, because he was always coming in that direction, from that direction. And so I believe that's home to him. It's been home for a long time. I believe he's a 5-year-old this year, and I believe that he's probably likely to live in about the same area, because he's got to be king of that area. I would think, but who knows? That's what's got me thinking so much.
Now, do you think he summers? Do you think he's using that area in the summer, or does he shift into using it in the fall?
No, I think he uses that area in the summer, and then he shifts over to. Remember that big open field that we were in at the end of night one? Then he shifted to over there, and then I got just a bazillion pictures of him over there. So instead of maybe heading straight west, or straight east, he heads straight east and then straight north. I don't know.
Are you getting daylight pictures of him?
Yeah.
At what time of the year?
All times of the year.
Really?
Yeah. You guys are going to laugh if I don't kill this deer.
What's that?
I said you guys are going to laugh if I don't. And I can tell you right now who's going to kill him. It's not going to be me. It's going to be Josh.
Kick him off then.
No, there's no kicking Josh. I wouldn't want to. He's a source of information. He's a great neighbor to have, and
you could feed him disinformation. You don't have to kick him off. You just steer him astray a little bit.
Oh man, he's a good guy.
you said that as you're moving the cameras back, then suddenly you kind of lost track of him. Do you think you were moving the cameras back and you were getting into his safe zone, and then he started shifting, adjusting a little bit? Is it possible, or where you were moving him back to, it's not really bedding type terrain?
No, I should say I didn't get him consistently in one spot.
Okay.
I got him consistently in an area that's 300 yards deep north and south.
Interesting.
And
Cool.
I can't help but feel that the reason that he was so nomadic, if that's the right term, and I use that term loosely because nomadic suggests that he's, miles apart, and he's not. He's hundreds of yards apart. But the reason that he was so nomadic is because I had those trail cameras everywhere.
Yeah, maybe. Apple trees out there?
Yep.
You do.
All
because
over.
There's a certain all over, that makes it tough too, because there's a certain time of the year where when those apples are right there, like it's a short window, but when they're right there in them.
Yeah, I had a piece of property that I owned for 13 years that had one apple tree on it, and it was the 20th of August through the 27th, just like clockwork.
Yep.
And you'd get the biggest deer on there every night for those 7 days. But yeah, I've got my work cut out for me, and I appreciate you guys helping me dissect this. Maybe we'll just make this a whole series. But
Jason, one more thing I might try or throw out real quick. Like I had one like him a couple of years ago that I was, I knew he was alive. I thought I knew where he bedded, but I had never been in there, and I needed to know, and I didn't want to trail camera him to death. And I just took a walk it was mid to late August, and it was one of those days when it was 110 in the shade, like midday, not going to be any deer up moving around, just to see if I could kick him out of his bed on purpose. And and believe it or not, like I didn't kick him out of there, but I found some sign in there that I hung on, and I almost killed him from. I didn't get it done, but like I was willing to take the risk of bumping him. Like if I would have bumped him out of there, I'd have immediately thrown the stand up and confirmed where he lives. You know what I mean? And it's that risk to reward scenario.
And then the tricky thing with that too, to again play the devil's advocate, I've done that same thing. But do you really know if you kicked him out of there or not? Maybe he saw you coming from a long ways away.
Right.
He's not. Did you say it was summer? Right?
Yeah, dead of summer, hot.
So you don't have rubs yet, leaving that sort of sign. They're not super aggressive in that way. So you maybe did kick him out of there, and you just didn't see him. He was way ahead of you. I mean, when those big boys, when they bed, they're set up very well. Even in the summer, in my experience, they're set up to slip out of there without you knowing about it. Not always. I mean, but.
Do you guys think a mistake that a lot of hunters make is not giving that mature deer the credit they deserve?
Yeah, and sometimes I personally give them too much credit. I think I'm playing a game with another human, but it's just an animal.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I think it's very dependent on time of year for them, obviously. And like, Joe was saying earlier, you can watch you can watch a 205 out in the summer, just doing his thing, not a care in the world. And come November, you're in trouble,
Right. Two different animals.
Yeah, two different animals. But yeah, you guys are spot on with all that.
Joe, when you're... Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I was just saying, this is going to be exciting to see if you kill him. I want to see this, see it all go down on video and hear you break it down. It's be cool. I love hunting target bucks. That's where I get my excitement from. So this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I've got... I feel like I've got a solid plan come the 25th of October. Before then, I'll be frank with you. I think I'm lost. I feel like I'd be better off, staying out of there. And just because of my schedule this year, and I'm going to do some filming of an elk hunt in late September, which is going to limit my time. And I won't be able to scout as much because I'm going to film an antelope hunt in August. So some of those things will work in my favor. We'll just see what happens. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, Joe, real quick, and I know we've taken a lot of your time already, is with respect to hunting private ground, do you pre-hang stands or are you always a hang and hunt guy?
Always a hang and hunt. I used to do the pre-hang stand thing, and I would catch myself being lazy and going to those pre-hung sets, and the pre-hung sets were never right, or they're one tree off, or so it's become always a hang and hunt thing. And you hear a lot of people say, I don't want to have to hang a tree stand, but when you're hanging the tree stand every time, and that's what hunting has become for you, it's not a big deal. Does that make sense? It's almost like a psychology thing. Like I trick myself into this is the way we hunt.
Right. No, I
That's
agree
a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I hunted, I took that year off from hunting any private at all and just hunted public. It was, I think you felt more invested in every hunt, maybe than you do on a pre-hung stand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And on my end, like I've transitioned over to, like, I don't do 100% hanging hunts, but I'd say I'm 50-50 now. And I think when you talked about the mental aspect of it, I think when I take all the time and hump all that stuff in there and get up the tree, like I'm more like mentally engaged in the hunt because the work that it took to get in there and do it quietly than going into a pre-hung.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, I just feel like I'm more engaged because I put forth that effort.
Yeah, and you're going into somewhere that you've been planning and you haven't tried it before. Yeah. Yep.
I agree with all that, and that's what as I was listening to you, I'm thinking out loud about, why don't we do more of that on private? And I think there's certainly a case to be made to possibly do that, but at any rate, are you a saddle guy or pretty much?
No, okay. I've been using it a little bit here and there. You get those swamp spots that are way back in, and maybe you're only 2 feet up in the tree, and you just need something to kind of get you in the right spot. I've been using it for that, but I like I know people hide behind the tree with a saddle, but I like to have the deer coming right at me and not have a tree in between me and them. And then with I got to give Dan a plug here with his stand coming out. I've got one sitting on my living room floor right now. That thing is going to be sweet in terms of just cutting weight. It's going to be awesome. So then I probably use the saddle less.
Gotcha. I have grown to love my saddle. I am not one of the few privileged ones to have a stand of Dan's, but I will at some point. We just talked about that the other day, so that'll be exciting when that actually happens. Clint, how are you getting along with your saddle? Tethered sent you one, right?
Yeah. I certainly haven't climbed with it yet, but I've set it down there on the, just off the ground it's a learning curve. And I'll be the first to admit the reason why I haven't tried a saddle before. I just didn't. I was a bit intimidated to try it, maybe like stepping out of my comfort zone.
Sure.
But it's really cool. It's not as hard to learn as I thought it would be. I've still got a long ways to go, and that's what we're going to do this summer is peck away at that and use it quite a bit for, definitely those, like Joe said, those one-time spots where I need to know what's in there and let's go try and kill him.
Yep.
And, not have to worry about pre-scouted trees and pre-hung stands. I can just go in there and throw up at anything. And
right.
I think that'll be a lot of fun. That's one of my goals for this year. Maybe it's just, I want to shoot a deer out of the saddle. Just to say I've done it and learned it. I think that makes you better if you try and learn stuff that you're not, super comfortable with.
For sure.
And one thing I'll add too, that I used my saddle for almost more than anything last year was summer scouting or summer glassing, because a lot of times, like where I live, a lot of it's pretty darn flat, and you get up in some of these big naked trees, and you can see out quite a ways. And I used it almost like a harness. Like I would stand on tree limbs while I was glassing, but then I knew if I fell out or something, I was hanging on by that saddle. So I use it a lot for that in summer. Just it's lighter, summer's so darn hot.
Right.
It's a lot less carry and whatever.
That's not a bad idea. I may give that a go. Actually, you wouldn't have to get super high. It covers plenty on the field edge.
Yeah. You maybe even find a tree. Because your tree for glassing, the tree doesn't have to be perfect. Like when you're going for the kill, so maybe you find a tree that's got a bunch of limbs on it. And all you need is the saddle. You don't need to bring sticks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, any final thoughts before we let you go, Joe? We could probably talk all night.
Yeah, we could. No, nothing that jumps out in particular.
Okay. Clint, anything you want to share before we say goodbye?
Not really. I appreciate you coming on, Joe. I always learn something from you guys on the beast, and I may not hunt in hill country or marsh territory, but man, I've learned a pile of and applying some of that to Midwestern farm country, and you guys always do good work. It's always good stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been
looking forward to your guys' kills this year. I look forward to your videos now that we've talked about it.
Yeah, well, you'll see on social media here, probably the week after this airs, we're gonna have some pretty big changes coming up, and some pretty significant new partnerships, and some exciting stuff happening for White Knuckle.
Cool.
But
awesome.
we'll get into that on another show. But hey, thanks for taking the time. I'm glad we were able to finally get you on. It only took me 4 months.
Yeah, I know. I kept pushing it.
I appreciate it, brother. Have a good rest of your night, and both of you guys take care.
Yeah, you guys too.
All right, thanks.